Today we begin with Mother's questions and answers of 1950-51. Last week we completed the volume on 57-58. During the last 2 years that we have been discussing Mother's teachings, we have covered conversations which took place in 1929, words of long ago, words of the Mother third series, education, four austerities and liberations, and we took up the questions and answers of 1957-58 because in a sense they represented the sequence of what we had been studying in our later books. But now we have the various questions and answers between 1950 to 1957. Some of them are still being edited and prepared, but we have before us, to begin with today, 1950-51 questions. The first question that Mother discusses is the ideal attitude that a seeker should have as a rule of life if one is to function as an instrument of the divine, to do works in offering to the divine. Then she lays down a golden rule: choose without preference, execute without desire. Choose without preference. For as we have seen, we are given a choice at every moment, and most of our choices are decided by our predilections, by our likes and dislikes, our prejudices. And it is this subconscious or half-conscious tendency, influenced by certain attitudes that we have to men and things, that vitiates our choice. We cannot be sure that our choice is the right one, though it may seem to be a very attractive and a convenient one to us at the moment. But for a spiritual seeker, the choice has to be the right one, in consonance with the choice of the soul. And to be sure that it is the right choice, we have to first take the precaution of eliminating from us preferences and prejudices. This is also necessary when we want to be guided. Often we look into ourselves, look to the psychic being or to the Mother in us for guidance. And when we feel that we have received the guidance, there is always a doubt whether it is not inspired by some subterranean desires. And when I asked Mother once how we can be sure that the guidance is the correct one, she said, first remove your likes and dislikes, personal likes and personal dislikes. It is only then that the voice of the soul will find a chance to express itself and be heard. That is the first part. The second part, assuming that we have eliminated our preferences, we have taken precaution to keep a blank slate on which the choice is written. The next step is execute without desire. Once we start executing, once we start acting, there is always the pursuing desire for a particular fruit, particular result, and the attention always leaping to the anticipated result. That gives us the driving force for action. This shall not be. Mother says that we must do a work, execute it, because it is the right thing to be done. We shall not concern ourselves at that moment with what the consequences are going to be, whether they are going to be convenient to us, they are going to serve our interests. A seeker has to replace desire by the vision of truth. The right thing, the dictates of truth, the demands of truth. And Mother explains in this connection why she prefers the word truth to the word God. Many have wondered, and some have asked, why in the ashram they don't use the words God as commonly as they use the divine. Mother has explained many times, and she explains it here also, that the term God has had so many unfortunate connotations acquired by the indiscriminate use of the word in religions and prophets. They visualize a being, a superior being, above the world, above the universe. Governing it may be or indifferent, whatever it is, but he is not in the world, he is above. The divine of Mother's conception or of Sri Aurobindo's conception is not that. The divine whom Mother speaks of is the reality that indwells this universe, indwells each individual form, and is identified with the universe. He is not exhausted by the universe, but he transcends, but still he is not separate from the universe. Second, religious traditions have always tended to look upon God as a supreme judge who weighs our good and evil, the good actions and the bad actions, and then awarding a judgment. Whether it is on the final day or day to day is immaterial. But the God of Mother's conception is a being, a supreme being of compassion, of love, justice, judgment. These are foreign to his way of manifestation. It is grace, love and compassion. They are the master words in the unrolling of the divine consciousness. The next question is, if that is the divine, how to know the divine will? The first, we have half answered the question already, and that is, it is desires that vitiate our will. It is desires that prevent our will being in tune with the divine will, or being instruments of the divine will. These desires, for by one who is serious, they should be bundled up and thrown into the flame or the fire of aspiration. They are to be burnt. It is only when desires are thus rooted out of our being that we can reflect the true divine will. Otherwise, we never know at what level, in what corner, the higher will gets corroded by our desires. This is the second precaution. Third is, do not judge. When you want to be guided by the divine will, the divine wisdom, you shall not judge, presume to judge people, presume to judge God's actions. After all, we judge with our minds, and our minds are not designed to judge. Mind is an instrument that seeks for knowledge. It does not know. It is a projection of ignorance, striving to turn itself into an instrument of knowledge. It does not know, and it has no right to judge. The mind judges, even it does, from appearances. Mother said long ago, in connection with the reactions of some of the visitors when they visit to the ashram, that the disciples, by disciples she meant those who are following the spiritual path indicated by the teacher. The disciples judge the forms by the master. The others judge the master by the forms. The mind is easily led by the forms which it sees on the surface, and it draws its conclusions, perhaps logical conclusions, from what it sees, from appearances. But appearances are not realities. They are more often than not masks of reality. Then there is the often asked question about concentration. She had, at that time when these questions were being asked, written something in the bulletin concerning concentration, dispersion of energies, correct judgment, and some of the topics which had been relevant when the physical culture education had been started, the gymnastics and the tournaments were being held, and Mother herself used to be the judge. So at that time questions are asked, how is correct judgment to be formed, whether energies can be expended in these games by spiritual seekers, how to arrive at the right judgment uninfluenced by other considerations, and whether for growth it is good to concentrate, or as held by some to disperse as wide as possible our energies. Mother observed that both concentration and dispersion have their roles to play in different contexts. Now, concentration is very important for those who want to discipline their lives, who set serious goals for their existence, particularly when it is a question of receiving energies from the environment. Unless the mind is vigilant, concentrated, you cannot receive and much less maintain the energies, spiritual or material or vital, that are poured into you. A concentrated effort is necessary to keep things that are poured into you controlled. And in the very exercise of this concentration of the mind, the capacity for concentration grows. If under whatever plea we give up the habit of concentration, then it is very difficult to pick it up again. Concentration, says Mother, has to be cultivated like muscles. Even as in physical culture, we culture the muscles, exercise the muscles, promote the movement and the activity of the muscles. And because only so do the muscles acquire strength. So even concentration has to be exercised. Things may be small, things may be big, but the habit of concentration has to be kept up. It may be a very light literature, it may be a newspaper, it may be a scripture, but the attitude that approaches, the mind that studies, it has to do it in a concentrated manner. Speaking of energies, especially the exchange of energies between individuals, or an exchange of energies between an individual and nature, most of us do not observe that this exchange goes on without our noticing it, without our so much participating in it. Mother cites the example of children, of animals, who are absolutely uninhibited in their receiving the energies, universal energies, throwing out energies from themselves without calculation, without forethought. The interference with this transaction of exchange of energies takes place when the mind is awake, when the mind seeks to decide. There are theories erected by mind saying that we shall conserve the energies, and if we expend the energies, we will not be able to replace them to the same extent and at the same speed. I had once mentioned in another meeting, we had here a doctor, a very tall man, retired. He was round about 70, and he used to walk at a snail's pace. It would take him 5 minutes from here to reach the Mother's balcony. So we got naturally curious why this man is talking, whether he has a disease, any difficulty in movement. And when somebody went and asked him, then he said, no, it is on principle. He is a doctor who believes, he was a doctor who believed in science, and he said, each individual is given a particular fund of energy by nature. Call it God, call it nature. And if you exercise certain economy and spend it very carefully and thriftily, the chances are that you will live longer. If you are a little rash and use your energies, God-given energies, freely, naturally the lifespan will be shortened, and the moment that energy is exhausted, you die. Now when we told it to Mother, Mother had a hearty laugh. She said it doesn't work like that at all. Actually, and this was her one of the fundamental principles of her approach to life and that is, the more we give, the more we receive. The more we work, the more we give out the energies, little paltry energies that are within us, the more energies are poured into us. So she cited the children, they don't care, they don't calculate. See how they grow rapidly till their mind becomes active. They have no care. They just go on playing, exerting themselves without taking rest. They don't want to take rest, they don't want to take afternoon nap, but they insist on playing, jumping about. It is because nature replaces the energies as rapidly as they are poured into the reservoir. So this is a fact, this is a truth that operates on all levels, mental, spiritual or physical. If we think, if the mind is exerted, if the mental energies are activated and exerted, more ideas, more thoughts come. Otherwise, the mind comes to a standstill. So also the vital energies, so also the physical energies. Though I have learned from experience that here also there is a limit. Long before the Club of Rome issued the report on the limitations of growth, we had perceived that there is a limit. Beyond a certain healthy limit, it is dangerous to throw off energies. But one thing is, we can go on extending the line. The limit today need not be the limit tomorrow. But for that one has to work, test for oneself, and go on extending the line where one has to stop. But there is a line where one has got to stop. Because nature may be lavish, nature may be generous. The capacity of our system to absorb what nature gives, that is limited. In spite of our best will, in spite of our enthusiasm, physical nature, mental nature, they impose their own hesitations, reservations, and the inconscient pull, the subconscious pull influences the situation. So as a law of life, as a principle, it is ideal and we have to follow. But each one has to cut the coat according to his measurement. Second, speaking on the same topic, she said, it is all right for people living the ordinary life to look around for the supply of energy. But for a seeker, he has to learn to look above himself. The source of energy is there, high above, in the superconscious. And one has to draw from there. The energies around us are after all limited by the frontiers of ignorance, limitations. The energies from above, they are free, partake something of the infinity and eternity of the superconscious. The discussion of concentration leads naturally to the question of meditation. Whether concentration is superior or meditation. Mother's answer is, meditation concerns only the mind. We meditate upon a truth, an idea, a conception. We work out problems, but all with the mind. But concentration is much more dynamic, more active, more pervading. It is the whole consciousness that is focused, brought together and focused on an object. So the entire being participates, for however short a duration, in the operation of concentration. And if we want to know a thing, acquire knowledge of an object, of a movement, it is by concentration that we stand a greater chance. He says, concentrate upon it without interruption. Put your whole soul behind that concentration, and the object will one day yield its content. The full knowledge, the true knowledge is of identity. But before an identity is arrived at, you must have a point of contact. And that point of contact comes as a result of concentration of consciousness. And this concentration has to be kept up till the contact is established, till the contact is constant. Once the contact is established, it goes on extending itself till one arrives at identity. We spoke of the absorption of energies from above or from around. But there is an enemy which interferes with the flow of energies. In a general way, we said it is mind that interferes. But in a more specific way, Mother spots out depression, a mental or a vital depression that closes the doors to the inflow of energies. She uses her famous phrase that depression is nothing but acute egoism. Why do we get depression? Because something that we want or what we think we need is denied. Something goes contrary to our wish, to our desires, or what we consider to be our well-being, maybe even true well-being. That disappointment, a sense of frustration, that brings about a lowering of the level of our consciousness. And that is called depression. Literally, it is a depression in the level of the functioning of consciousness. And when that happens, we close the door to the free interchange either of spiritual energies or material or vital energies. This depression has to be anyway kept out. When I have a vague recollection that when Sri Aurobindo was asked, what is the remedy for depression, to prevent depression, he replied that the remedy is not to get depressed. And I suppose that's all that can be said about it. Because in depression, there is a certain assent in our being. Something in us finds it right, justified to be depressed. They say, what is there to be happy about, cheerful about? All these things are going wrong. In the very act of assenting to the legitimacy of the depression, we give it a claim. We lodge it in ourselves. So even when circumstances appear most warranting the onset of a depression, we have to deny room for depression, because the depression is a forerunner of a number of other black intrusions in our environment which hold us prisoners. Depressions, long continued, can bring about melancholia. Depressions indulged in like this can bring about physical disease. And much more dangerous than physical disease or melancholia is the spiritual loss. The psychic within, the light and the joy that flow naturally from the psychic are pushed back. They get rejected by a being which is open to depression. So the psychic recedes and waits for its hour behind the curtain. Coming again to the question of judgment. Why many times our judgments are faulty? Mother explains that she analyzes the whole phenomenon that leads to judgment. Our eye sees a thing. There is a perception of the eye. That perception is carried by the nerves to the brain. There is a cell in the brain which takes note of it and evaluates that contact, assesses the report of the senses. And this interval between the perception and the evaluation by the cell in the brain, during this interval there is the influence of our feelings. Feelings which are already there as the background. Influence of attitude, influence of feeling. That interferes and gives a color to our evaluation or judgment, which may or may not be in correspondence to what is the true state of affairs. That is why Mother says that in an accident takes place, number of people are involved, but if you ask each of them, each gives a different version, because the experience of that accident has filtered through various attitudes, various feelings. So though the two people have been struck down by, say, a car, their reports will vary. Each one will report slightly differently. That is because we allow our subjective state to interfere, to intervene and influence our judgment. We have already noted that for correct judgment we have to throw out preference and repulsion. In addition to preference and repulsion, she asks that we exclude personal reaction. We have certain reasons to react in a particular way. Now these reactions, governed by our personal attitudes, they vitiate the situation. When a problem is presented to us, when a question is asked, when a situation is created, we always tend to decide on the basis of our personal equation. We do not have the objectivity enough to separate things from our personal involvement and judge things on their own merits. The mental discrimination has to be exercised to keep out the personal element. So many problems in collective life particularly could have been avoided if the personal element were kept out. One can very well have the play of personal element in personal life, but in a collective life, personal preferences, personal intrusion, not only out of place, but dangerous. And last, we have to keep in mind that true knowledge is knowledge by identity. We have to try to identify ourselves with the problem, with the question, without trying to anticipate the results. When a work is before us, there shall not be an anxiety for the consequences. This tension created by the feeling or the doubt, what will be the consequence, whether it will succeed or not, whether I will be able to finish it in the time required or not, that itself creates a certain tension, both in the mind and the nerves. And that acts as a block, a barrier to the flow of the energies, the divine energies or natural energies that function through your instrumentation.
Others choose without preference. He Krishnamurti choice made awareness. Buddha's Krishna here. In Krishna's Anashaktava. Do they not tell all the things?
Yes, it is the same principle. The necessity of elimination of desire. After all, preferences, they are rooted in particular desires. So, from whatever the vocabulary, whatever the approach, the principle is the same in this matter. Desire vitiates, desire binds, desire deforms, and desire deflects.
Something like a psychic preference, something which better for you.
Psychic does not say, psychic has no preference. The psychic will not say this is better for you. Psychic says this is the right thing. And when the psychic guidance comes, it always takes all things into account. And what is the right thing for you to do. So it is there is no preference there. There is the direct perception.
I mean, this concentration.
Don't work, I think. Feels. Result. Yes, naturally. one doesn't get the right result immediately. It is an end product of a process which you have to try. Till then, common sense, an enlightened common sense with a certain humility that we do not know.
But I mean also there are some kinds of meditation where one feels immediately some relaxation and some energy flowing. But when one concentrates on the divine, all this that may not be there in the beginning.
Nobody is able to concentrate in the beginning for a length of time. So one always starts with concentration, and once there is the focusing of consciousness, then concentration is slowly relaxed and allowed to develop into meditation. So in the beginning, and for beginning is a long time, both are necessary. Even in the traditional yoga, which we have discussed, there is first the dharana. Dharana means concentration upon an object. Afterwards follows dhyana, the flow of consciousness on an object, step by step, without leaving the object. But a meditation has to be supported initially by concentration. You may concentrate upon the theme, idea, form, sound, breathing, whatever it is. It is all a way to bring together the dispersed threads of consciousness around one thing, and thereafter meditation. In yoga, this is the normal process.
When we are identified with the higher consciousness, does there remain aspiration? In fact, how it remains for him, always constant.
The aspiration remains as long as the sense of I remains. After, when that sense is merged, when there is an identity, who is to aspire and for what? So Mother explains this predicament in her prayers and meditations. When we come to that passage, you will see. Because there have been some occasions, she says, there is so much of identity that even to pray, even to call, it looks artificial. Because she is one with the divine. So at that stage, there is the aspiration, prayer, devotion, these are not relevant. There are varying states of consciousness. Till that state is naturalized, that state of complete identity is naturalized, there are varying states. At times you are identified, at times you are again not identified. If you study the life of Chaitanya, for instance, there were periods when he was fully identified with Lord Krishna and he behaved as one. There were occasions when he prayed to Krishna when he was only a devotee and he was praying, he was worshipping, adoring. So these states are built up step by step till the state of identity comes. Till then, all these have their role to play. said that the context was, it is the young students who were asking. Apropos her writing on concentration. She had written on concentration, wanting the children, youngsters, to learn to concentrate. Our Jay Shankar was there at that time, and particularly in the tournaments, in the events, she wanted them to concentrate. There was not a question of concentration on God or divine at that time. So for these growing children, concentration is more important. If you ask them to meditate, they will meditate, on irrelevant subjects. But for spiritual sadhana, a judicious combination of both is necessary. In studies, it is concentration. So these questions were mostly at that time confined to the children, students. The sadhaks had not yet started joining and interfering. Yes, in that context, she said that instead of sitting for hours together in stagnant meditation, 3 minutes of concentrated aspiration is better. It is to discourage this kind of meandering meditations. People spending hours together, leaving work and leaving everything else, and sleeping in the guise of meditation. That she said, better to be alert, yoke your consciousness to something dynamic, and 3 minutes. It is also in that context that she said to the American lady who had asked her how to meditate, she said, I do not meditate. But we can't take these things out of their context. She did not need to meditate because her consciousness was always in that state of identity, which is the aim of meditation. So the aim being realized, the process did not have to be repeated. Meditation, concentration flows into meditation. That is a natural process. Natural process. At the end of the work, one becomes aware. It was always there. When you start with concentration, the consciousness is thrown into that mood. But when you stop the work, your attention goes to your stage and you realize.
My question is still not clear. Some kinds of meditations have a sound, and one glides
With that concentration on the ideal in the beginning. In the beginning, one has the ideal before one. But thereafter, the process works itself. So whether you hear the sound or see a form, these are all part of the working. As spiritual sadhana is concerned, a part of the consciousness is always fixed upon the idea. Is always concentrated, focused. The rest of the consciousness is at work, taking cognizance, exerting itself in various ways. But one part is always concentrated.
Sometimes in meditation there is a light and we pray and that light lives. But sometimes there is a touch of invisible form and it lives. So which is the better?
Both are it is not always safe to follow either the voices or the forms or the lights that one sees in meditation. It may be right, it may not be. So one has to follow an inner conviction or try to obtain an inner corroboration to what the lights or the forms say or indicate. The definitive guidance has to come from within, because there are lights and lights. There are voices or forms and forms. Up to a great length of time, one cannot be certain that it is the right light or voice.